Michael-Shawn Dugar from The Athletic, co-host of Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast. Of course, read all of his work up there at The Athletic. He's got two he's got fantastic stories all the time, but the last two were just sensational. One, just the offseason breakdown, and then the other one just about, hey, John Schneider. And it's not the title of the piece, but the piece should be titled, The Seat is Warming Up there on John Schneider. Michael-Shawn, how are you?
I'm doing good. I don't mind the wait, actually. I was trying to book a flight to Cancun here.
What are you, an NBA team?
Yeah, no, it's funny. Yeah, all the players go to Cabo and Cancun when they get eliminated. And then, I'm doing the same thing. Probably going to be there.
Hey,
Super Bowl
when are
weekend,
you going?
So. Super Bowl weekend. I'm looking at going to Cancun for my brother's birthday. So
okay, so I'm going to give you some travel advice. Okay.
All right.
I don't know where you're going to stay in Cancun, but it doesn't matter. You're gonna go to Cancun, and I'll text this to you. You're gonna go take a day trip to a small little island off Cancun, and it's called Isla Mujeres. Okay, it's about 25-minute, 30-minute max ferry ride, and it takes off right from like downtown Cancun. It's where we go almost every year for family vacation, for like 10 years. It's unbelievable. It's the smallest little island. It's like 3 miles long. It's like 1.5 miles wide. Everyone's driving golf carts around. It's awesome. You'll enjoy it.
All right.
So
yeah, definitely text that to me. Yeah. I'm trying to set that up now. I think we're staying at Puerto something, beachfront, Airbnb,
all inclusive.
No, they were just it's a guy's trip. We're gonna do Airbnb, kind of buy with something hotel zone or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. If it's by there, you're real close to the ferry. Jump over there for a day. You'll go to Playa Norte, which is the North Beach. There, you'll have a blast. You'll just have
all right. There we go. I'll pitch that to the group once I get that. Get those details.
All right, Mike Garafolo is saying it appears that Klint Kubiak is in the driver's seat for the job. Him and Rap sheet with that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Have you done like a deep dive on Kubiak? And if Kubiak is the guy, what would your reaction be to that?
I'm gonna do the deep dive after we do this. So that's my plan, because I think once you get the second interview, it becomes pretty apparent that I should start doing some research. When all the first interviews, I was like, man, I'm just gonna sleep in, hang out with the kid. I'm not. I work a lot in the regular season. I'm not gonna kill myself over like researching this, baby-faced assassin that they were interviewing, the Minnesota guy. I forget his name, but he's like the assistant quarterback coach who looks younger than me because he is.
The guy's got great hair. Great hair.
Yeah. He's 28 or something like that, crazy. But yeah, I wasn't chasing all those down. But the Kubiak thing is interesting. I really watched their offense a lot, the Saints offense, the early version of it. Because as you remember, they were just dropping a 40 ball.
That's right.
It seemed like every other week, running like that kind of wide zone, under center scheme. It was really working. They were really explosive. That Shaheed, I forget his name, receiver was like Deshaun Jackson reincarnated every week, was like a 50, 60-yard bomb. Really good stuff. And then they just fell off a cliff. So I'm interested to kind of study that. Maybe it was just because their O-line fell apart or because Carr got hurt or because of all the injuries to Olave, Shaheed. So I'm going to do a deeper dive on that. I think on its face, I'm not like super moved by the decision if it is him. I'm not really sure who would move me, to be fair. But I do like the fact that he just got play calling experience with multiple stops, multiple different quarterbacks. I think that's going to be really important, as we've discussed. I just think Grubb was kind of in over his head is strong, but for lack of a better term, he kind of was, and it showed up this year. I don't think an experienced guy should have the same issues Grubb had. He could have different ones, but if he shouldn't have the same issues Grubb had in year one.
Because you talked about that in one of your last pieces at The Athletic, just talking about the offseason, outlook on the team, that if one of your things that should be a requirement for an offensive coordinator is play calling duties, like who has had experience calling plays at the NFL level.
Yeah, I think that's really important for what they want to be. It's not like every guy who's done it, who gets hired this offseason, has to have play calling experience for other teams. I think it's different, everywhere. I think like the Raiders guy, whoever the Raiders hire, if that's some up and coming dude or whatever, I think that's fine. I think that's the same thing for the Bears, although they may have a bit more urgent needs because of where they feel their rosters at. But in these teams that are kind of like on this rebuilding path, I feel like can have the patience needed to watch a guy grow. The Seahawks are trying to win like today. Like they are not happy about the fact that they are probably just like me booking flights to Cancun. That is not a good place for them to be in. And to avoid that, I think you really got to have someone who's seen a lot more, maybe not seen it all, but just seen a lot more, seen that defensive coordinator, seen that front style, seen that blitz scheme, knows how to prepare this, knows how to teach this concept. Maybe a good red zone designer would be my like really, really, really preferred thing. That might be at the top of the list. If I was interviewing some of these candidates, like how can you fix our red zone stuff? So I think just having someone who's done it before, preferably at multiple different stops, I think would be really, really helpful. So that part of it would move me if it was Klint.
Any just looking at the tree, obviously Gary is, Gary Kubiak was a longtime, quarterback in the league, longtime play caller, kind of comes from that, the old kind of West Coast system, and it fits in with the Shanahans. So you start to see the not only the older Shanahan, which why am I blanking on Kyle Shanahan's dad, Mike Shanahan, Shanahan to Kyle to the Kubiak influence. So you see some of that. So we've wondered which direction McDonald would want to go, and so it appears if this indeed is the hire of Klint Kubiak, he's kind of going in that direction of that Shanahan West Coast tree.
Yeah, it's what it looks like. It's interesting because that's necessary. Everything is cyclical, and this is a copycat league. So when something gets hot, everyone hires someone to do it. And there was a time when that was the hot thing. I feel like when Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan got in, you saw a lot more teams doing that under center, get to the perimeter run game, and it's fewer teams doing that now. It feels like there's a lot more teams trying to go between the tackles with their run game, shotgun stuff. Trying to take advantage of the too high looks, because when you're in too high as a defense, well, now you got light bodies up front. I'm just going to run it right at you up the guards. You're seeing guards get paid. You're seeing like power backs who can just like stay between the tackles, have a lot of impact on their offenses. A Saquon, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs in Green Bay. And you're seeing some of the teams do what Klint and those guys were doing in New Orleans. The Texans try to do something similar. The Falcons, their run scheme, they have a McVay disciple. At least they had. Zach Robinson, I think is his name. He was running the same thing with Cousins, kind of that stretch plays, things like that, play action off of it. So there are teams still doing it, but it feels like the new hotness, to quote Men in Black 2, is kind of the shotgunish power.
Yeah.
Whether it's shotgun or not, just like running power football to take advantage of the fact that the numbers favor just running it up the gut now because of this too high world we're living in.
Well, the first two games, you mentioned it, they were great in those first two games, and then they collapsed right after that. I'd have to go back and look what led to them collapsing. I think it was like
I can tell you what happened.
Was it a 6-game losing streak right after that? They just start playing good teams? Because the first two games were the Panthers and the Cowboys.
Yeah, and I think that was part of it. But the other part was, I think their third or fourth game was against the Eagles and Vic Fangio. And
yeah,
they beat the snot out of them offensively. I forget the score, but the Saints didn't score much.
It was 15-12. It was at least a close game.
Yeah. So the Saints' offense came crashing down to earth. And they basically, to oversimplify it, they basically used the blueprint that Belichick used in the Super Bowl against the Rams in 2018 with the fronts, basically saying, here's a bunch of guys on the edges. Now you can't get outside of us. Do something else. And that scheme has struggled to adjust to that. I mean, McVay's basically given up on it. Now he's changed his whole scheme because teams figured out, oh, you're trying to hit the perimeter? Well, here's a bear front, buddy. Here's a 6x1 front. Figure it out, and so it's a very stoppable schematic thing if you have a really good coach. So I say all that to say, I don't actually think Mike McDonald will hire Klint with that in mind. Like, oh, hey, yeah, let's go under center, perimeter runs, play action off of it. I think you would just want him more to do a better job probably of what Grubb was trying to do. Because there are teams doing that as well, very similar offenses, but doing it better. I think the Bengals would be the primary example of that for 2024.
Yeah, Carr ended up playing the first 5 games, and he got knocked out in that game. He didn't play in the Tampa Bay game or the Denver game. Or, I mean, he may have played, but, I mean, I'm just trying to think of, like, when he got – because, remember, Carr was dealing with injuries, all that year. Yeah, Spencer Rattler ended up starting that Buccaneers game and played 3 straight games.
Yeah, they fell apart. Their center got hurt, I think. A couple other O-line injuries. Right. Olave got hurt. Shaheed ended up ending on IR. Like, it fell apart for sure. So it wasn't just that, it's not like Kubiak forgot how to call plays, But I think it was more so. I think more so when I look at that hire, I see the experience and the background is something Mike would be chasing versus like, let's run this particular scheme, because I don't even think necessarily that scheme would match well with Seattle's personnel. And I think Mike would recognize that too.
Yeah, and I think we discussed this last week, and I've discussed it with others. I would just say to Mike Macdonald, like, look in the mirror. What gives you problems? Like, what's the offense that you struggle with? And he would go, okay, that one. Because it reminded me of, there was a little note. I'll just segue here to college football for a second. Jimmy Rogers, when Jimmy Rogers, the new Washington State coach, when he hired an offensive coordinator at South Dakota State, the Danny Freund gentleman who's now the offensive coordinator at Washington State, when he hired him at South Dakota State, going into that hiring process, Freund was at North Dakota, and the reason he hired him at South Dakota State was because that was the one offense that gave his defense the most issues. So he's like, well, let's just bring him on board. And then now he's brought him to Washington State. So when I relaying that story, that's what I thought about with Macdonald. Why not just hire the scheme that gives you problems? Or at least from that tree of it.
That's what Pete, this is another oversimplification, but that was Pete's kind of thinking with hiring Shane Waldron. From the Rams tree, it was like, McVay he's kicking our ass pretty routinely here. How do we stop this guy? And, Ken Norton actually came up with some decent answers, I thought, for the scheme. But then, at least on Pete's side, he was like, you know what? I'm just going to hire somebody from that tree. Let's figure it out. And I think by the time that would have been the answer, teams had started to shift there. I think Belichick's blueprint in that Super Bowl really, like I said, copycat league, that kind of showed teams how you can maneuver around that schematically, that kind of play action, perimeter stuff. It's not like it's the only way to stop it, but it is very stoppable. So, I think the main thing for Mike would be like, how would you, every question should start with this. Every interview, he should come in and be like, hey, how would you maximize from Mike Macdonald? How are you going to maximize the talent we have? Not this perfect world where you let's assume we make no changes to our roster. Just take the guys we have now. What are you gonna do? And I would work everything in the interview backwards from that question.
I would want Kubiak, whoever it is, to come in there, get on the whiteboard like old Gruden used to do, right? When he did that the old quarterback series. And I would just say, I want you to draw me red zone plays right now. And how do we get 14 the ball in the red zone? Just tell me how you're gonna get him open. And then that would be my first thing personally. And then I would go like, all right, how do we unlock Ken Walker in the run game? How do we get that better? How do we get Ken Walker from his rookie season? How do we take more advantage of him? It's a great point because, they do have the personnel from the skill position players, Mike, that they're good there. We're going to get into trades and money and cap and all that kind of stuff. But just looking at the personnel they have, it's good.
Yeah, I think the red zone, like I mentioned earlier, I'm with you. We can really just start there. Let's start with third down and red zone. How can ask the guy you're interviewing? Let's go. Call it right now. We're in the red zone. First and 10. First and goal at the 9. This is the coordinator we're playing. So I'll give you some fronts and some stuff. Generally, like this is the front they're showing us. This is the shell. Go. We need 7 right here. We're not selling for 3. Go. How are you going to get it done? I don't care if it's getting DK the ball, Noah, Jax, whoever, Tyler. Just like how are we going to get 7? Go. And we work backwards from there because that could answer the question of how do you get Ken more involved. That could answer the DK. We're just starting with that blanket idea of we need to score first and goal from the 9. How are we going to score? Go. I feel like the most telling, it's the most broad question to get you the most answers from that candidate.
Mike, we are in the time of off season and we drum up storylines. And DK is going to be the biggest storyline this offseason. Probably besides, number one was going to be the offensive coordinator search, and we kind of it seems like that's winding down. Number 2 is going to be Geno Smith and the contract. What are they going to do with him? And then DK, the future of DK. There's been a lot of talk. Do they trade him? What kind of money are they going to give him? How much do they invest in the wide receiver position? Where are we at with DK Metcalf? Do you think there is a possibility they would trade him, or is the likely scenario that they ended up working out a deal, some type of extension here this offseason?
Yeah, I think anybody's at chance of getting punted on. I think John's pretty much shown that. He'll just let guys walk, whether they're franchise icons, or whether they're a young guy in their prime who's playing well, like a Shaquille Griffin, or he'll trade a guy. Whether they're a young guy in their prime at a premium position like Frank Clark. traded Max Unger when he was playing really well too. So he'll get rid of anybody. So I never want to say never in that regard, particularly if it comes down to money, like it did with Frank. With Frank Clark, I think is really informative a situation. John basically was like, I'm not giving you the DeMarcus Lawrence contract. I will go collect the assets, even though you're a young guy, just had, I think, 13 and a half sacks that year on a defense that went to the playoffs. He was killing it, premium position, young player, homegrown guy. And John said, see ya, and that's fine. You can do that. I think that's a really good example when getting into the DK thing, is because when you talk about getting rid of any premium player, you're like, oh, we're going to save money and get assets. Right. Great. That's fine. You can never argue with the process of that, particularly with a non-quarterback. But let's talk about the trust level, I think, of reallocating those assets properly to immediately upgrade the team. And that's where I think the DK discussion should be framed. It's not just, okay, should they trade DK? They'll maybe get a late first round. Send them to the Patriots. You get pick 35, and you save a bunch of money. Of course, that sounds fine, right? It's a hard salary cap league. But the same thing happened with Frank. They got, I think, a first round pick, I believe, saved a bunch of cash, and didn't reallocate those funds properly, and the defense got worse, like immediately worse, and they still don't have a edge rusher as good as Frank was. That was 7 years ago now. And I think when I look at the DK situation, it's not about how much money he's going to make on the extension.
Because you're not going to really save money though if you move him.
I think you save like 10 mil or something like that.
You save 10, but his debt. Again, I'm not a capologist. Okay, I just read what others write. But his dead money, right, is $21 million. So you don't really save much, do you?
Well, you do, but I think the net savings is important there, because let's say you save $11 million. Say you trade DK, you send him to the Patriots. They give you their second round pick, which is pretty high, which is like why I keep using them, because I think it's going to be in the 30s because they have a very high first round pick. So let's say you do that and you save 11 mil. But then you got to talk about net savings, because we still need to pay other people, right? So it's like we're probably going to sign a receiver. So even if you sign, let's say you just go grab a random guy for 2 mil, really only netted $9 million in savings because we went and got somebody. It doesn't matter who the somebody is in this case. Okay. And we get the pick. And then we save money down the line because we're clearing DK from our 2026 books or whatever. Like the math on it all is fine, but it's all about the reallocation of those resources. It sounds great. Trade Frank Clark. Don't got to pay him $100 million. You get an extra first round pick. Great. Now we need to make sure our defense is good and we have an edge rusher. You know what they did in that draft after they traded Frank Puck? They drafted LJ Collier with that. You know what they did after that when they realized LJ wasn't the guy, and when he hurt his ankle in training camp? They traded for the Jadeveon Clowney. You know what they did after that? Then they had to go trade for Carlos Dunlap. It was like, our pass rush still isn't good at the time. This is in 2020 now. We're going to trade for Jamal Adams.
So it's a lack of trust that the people in charge, John Schneider, could actually properly reallocate that money to make the team better.
Immediately. I think the immediate part is important, because over time, maybe they could. But when you make moves like that with a team like where the Seahawks are now, you're not just like, oh, let's go get some young receiver that we got to develop and spend the extra $7 million on a guard and maybe be a 10-win team again next year. No, they're trying to, like I said, they're trying to win. So you're telling me I got to trust these cats to trade DK and reallocate those resources to getting the team better right now? I just have a hard time seeing that. It's hard to do it. Like, Puck, you look at the teams that have punted on good. Let's just look at receivers. They've had a hard time getting immediately better on offense. Whether you're talking about the Chiefs getting rid of Tyreek, the Bills getting rid of Stephon just recently, the Packers getting rid of Devontae. There's been a few other examples. Like, yeah, some of these teams have been okay, but did they get immediately better on offense? Did they reallocate those resources properly? You know what the Packers did when they got rid of Devontae? I think they used both those picks on defenders from Georgia. Their defense still isn't great.
What did the Chiefs do, though? I mean, because the Chiefs since then have won another Super Bowl. Did they not reallocate that money to their offensive line?
What they did, they did a few different things with the money. But their offense ended up still being fine because they had an all-pro tight end. But they definitely have to dramatically change their offense after that.
Arguably the greatest quarterback of all time.
Yes. But you know what, Puck? You know what they still ended up needing to do is dump more resources into receivers. Like they were still, they still had to make a midseason trade. Still had to go take Xavier Worthy most recently. You know, they probably still going to take a receiver again or try to pay for one in this offseason. It's not the Chiefs aren't the cleanest example, but in general, I feel like you could throw the Titans in there too when they got rid of AJ.
They got rid of AJ Brown. I wonder though, are teams starting, like if you've got a really elite quarterback, do you look at wide receivers? I brought this up earlier this week, like a money ball. Like we'll draft a guy and we can just plug in these different guys to play wide receiver because we have a really elite quarterback. Thus, we don't got to pay a ton of money to the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I think there's a world where that sounds great. I think the Vikings will tell you, yeah, you know, they punted on Stephon Diggs, got a first-round pick, took Justin Jefferson. Great. They got a better player for cheaper immediately. Sometimes you can do that. But then sometimes you're the Titans. Got rid of AJ, didn't want to pay him $100 million, drafted Treylon Burks, got immediately worse right away. Now everyone involved in that decision is now fired. You know, so it can go either way. I think it's really about, for me, do I trust the people to reallocate the resources? I do think that's the way to frame it, because we've seen it. We've seen this regime, front office specifically, try to replace premium talent. And it has generally gone poorly, whether you're talking about replacing the Legion of Boom, or where you're talking about replacing pass rushers, where you're talking about replacing Russell Okung at tackle. You know, like it's gone poorly in the immediate searches, which is why, like, go look at most of John's big trades in the last, like, let's say 8 years. Most of them are to cover up for not immediately drafting or signing in free agency players to replace the good ones he already had. You know, that's where most of those trades are born out of. Some of them are great trades like Quandre, but it's because you didn't hit on Marquise Blair that you needed Quandre, because you didn't hit on Tedrick that you needed Quandre. So, you know, that's where I get on the DK thing. I'm like, of course it makes sense to go reallocate the resources. Yeah, great. Do I trust you to do it though? You know, do I trust you to or would I rather you just keep the good player you have and just use him better? Which one's easier?
Yeah. It's all great points for sure. Hey, the last conversation or the last topic I had with Garafolo, I'm interested to get your opinion on it. And I brought up the example, it's the Rooney Rule, and I brought up the example of, like, Leslie Frazier's going to interview for the Cowboys this week. And Leslie Frazier's in his 60s. I don't know how many people really think Leslie Frazier is a true candidate for the Cowboys job. And I think that it's fair to sit back and be skeptical of the rule and go, are the Cowboys just interviewing Leslie Frazier because they need to fulfill the Rooney Rule and interview a minority candidate? You know, I don't know if we talked about it last week or a few weeks ago, or when Thomas Brown was brought up. Thomas Brown interviewed for the Seahawks OC job, who was the offensive coordinator. He was the interim coach for the Bears. And I think you look on the surface, you go, well, the Bears offense was terrible. Just like, what was good about the Bears offense? Nothing. You saw him up close and personal. It's such a big topic, Mike, but like the execution of, like, the rule behind it, you understand it and acknowledge it, and it's a good rule. Are the teams, is the league executing the rule properly? So, because when I see Leslie Frazier, I go, my first reaction is Leslie Frazier is not going to get the job. He's not even going to sniff the job for the Cowboys. Now, maybe I'm wrong. But I think of Leslie Frazier because of what I said to Garafolo. Were you covering the Seahawks back when they hired Pete Carroll? No, you weren't covering them, right? No. I forget how young you are.
Yeah, I graduated high school the year they hired Pete.
Okay, never mind. So I don't know if you remember this story. When they hired him, when Jim Mora was given his end of the year press conference, and looking forward to next year and all that, the Seahawks brass was in LA, essentially hiring Pete Carroll. They had already fired Jim Mora. He just didn't know it yet, and they were going to hire Pete Carroll. Well, then they do it, and like 2 weeks later, I can't remember the exact time frame, they bring in Leslie Frazier to do an interview. And then it comes out afterwards that the timeline, we're like, well, wait a minute, was that really even an interview, or are you just doing it to comply a rule? What's the perfect solution? How do you make it better?
Yeah,
if there's any way to make it better.
Yeah, I don't think you can. I mean, because you think of why the Rooney Rule exists in the first place. I believe it was because the NFL is about to get sued, and they were like, "All right, well, we gotta change something here. No one likes when they bring out the briefcases and suits, and like, all right, we're taking you to court." And I think that's how the Rooney Rule was born. And it's the idea. Really, you're talking about changing people's hearts, essentially. And that's just hard to do in general, as we've just seen in America for years. But it's just really hard to do when you talk about specifically NFL owners and telling them who they should act, who they have to consider to run their business, right? That's just tough, because that's really what it is. It's telling them, hey man, make sure you consider some black people for the gig. And it's like, well, what if I don't want to? I bought this thing. I paid billions of dollars for this thing. I'm gonna hire who I want. And the idea of you can hire who you want, I think, is something that's a fair rebuttal, honestly. Like, let's say Robert Kraft, right? It's like, I fired Gerard Mayo because I want to hire Mike Vrabel. Great. That is well within Robert Kraft's right. Like, why, if you think about it, if I'm Robert Kraft, why are you forcing me to interview someone else? It's my company. It's my business. I know who I want to hire, and that's what I'm going to do. I have that right as a business owner, like pulling out the lawyers to sue me to make sure I interview Byron Leftwich, before I do it. I feel like that ultimately can do a disservice to those minority candidates, as you're talking about with Leslie, because it's who are we to tell somebody like, hey man, make sure you consider some other folks. Like, for what? I think Garafolo mentioned the Raiders example. They were like, we want to hire John Gruden. Okay, cool. I run the Raiders. I own the Raiders. I want to hire John Gruden. Who are you to tell me I have to consider somebody else? So I think the application of it is always going to be clunky, because what we're trying to do, I guess, is not totally like sensible. Like, how can you force me? It's like somebody forcing you to hire someone to come on your show every week. It's like, why? It's the daily puck drop. I'm Puck. I don't want somebody else on here. How are you going to make me consider somebody else? What if I just don't want to?
I think the idea behind it is, can we get candidates in front of particular owners who would never consider it, right? Because of the years and years of, if somebody, Mike, if somebody that looked like you walks into a room and somebody like me is in the hiring process, they would take one look and go, I'm out. Just, the stereotype, right? Just the immediate, no, I'm good. And because we can see things, we don't get to know someone right away. We don't go through the interview process. And if I have we all stereotype. Everybody does when you meet somebody for the first time. You immediately do it. It's just a human trait. So I get the idea behind it and support the idea behind it, but I think the execution of it, and you bring up great points. I mean, I think if you own a business, they own the business. It's who they want to hire. And most of these owners, if they decide, hey, I'm going to make a move with a coach, like it's Jody Allen, right? Or maybe that's a poor example. It's Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones, Mike McCarthy is going to no longer be my coach. I'm sure Jerry Jones has got 10 people on a list that he's kept who he wants to give the job to, or at least be interested in giving the job to. So, but I guess the idea of it is to what Garafolo said. It's like the Tomlin situation. Well, we didn't think we'd hire Mike Tomlin, but once he got in the interview, we're like, okay, maybe it opens up our eyes to a different candidate we didn't think we would give time to. So,
the idea behind it is trying to force people to be open-minded. Really. Yeah, just to be more open-minded. But I also think, like, in football, this is a little bit hyperbolic, but I really think that's kind of a joke. Because, like, if you think about it, football, we look at hiring a head coach. We really only consider people who have done two things: either coached offense, been an offensive coordinator, or a defensive coordinator. That's like the tiniest pipeline in the world. Right. If you really think about it.
No special teams coach other than like Harbaugh is like the only one.
Yeah. Joe Judge, was a special teams guy who got hired. That was awful. But like in general, like it's such a small pool that we are pulling from anyway. And that's just, the norm is to pull from such a small pool. We don't consider any women for coaching. So you're cutting off like half the population right there. Just the people. You're just like, oh yeah, we'll not consider any women. So we're already throwing that right out the boat. We're half the people right here in America that love football. We're just not going to consider. So I feel like we're already dealing from this small pipeline, because the NFL will tell you that's the issue too. It's like, we got to let the owners know that there's these other coaches out here. Man, they know. There was a bunch of owners fawning over hiring Josh McCown. He had never coached anything more than middle school girls flag or something like that. And like, let's interview Josh McCown. I was like, well, how'd they find him?
Hey, but how is their red zone offense in the flag football middle school?
Yeah, you can't. I don't think you can organically force someone to be more open-minded. I think at a grand scale, maybe an individual, like one person, yes. But I don't think at a mass level, mass being the NFL owner level, like I just don't think you can. I think if you really want to do it, if you're the NFL, is you got to put some real punitive like penalties on not following. Like, hey, if we figure out your interview was a sham, here's your first round pick is gone, or something like that, or something that these guys really care about, some competitive disadvantage. I think that's the real way to do it. I don't think it can be rewarding for doing it right, like we kind of do with like, oh, you lost your black coach, here's 2 third-round picks. I think that's a weird rule. They should get rid of that. But I think a penalty would be more of the way to do it. Like, hey, you hired Gruden, you skirted the rule, or you got these sham interviews. All right, give us your first round pick. It's ours now. Something like that, I think, would lead to some maybe some better execution. But I still think the spirit of it would be a bunch of sham interviews, like I think we just saw in New England.
One couple more things, and then we'll wrap up, and I'll just kind of go in one of the pieces that you wrote. I mean, you've got 2 good pieces. One kind of on John Schneider, and then the other one, the Seahawks, a lot of work to do there in the offseason. You make a case, obviously, and I think we all support it, to bring back Ernest Jones, some cap decisions, and they need to make some decisions on clearing some money. Who do you think, when they look at it, and they can restructure deals, but who is a cap casualty in your mind? Is there someone or some people that you think that will no longer be on this team next season to clear up some cap space?
Yeah, I think Tyler's number is hard to carry. I think it's in the 30s. I think you save a lot of money there. Draymond's number, I think, is untenable. I guess in the 20s, 20 millions. I'm saying. I think Chenna's number is probably going to have to come down. You don't think he's a guy like, oh, we can just move on from, because you want to see what you got there because he's been so injured. And kind of freak injuries too. It's not like some of the chronic stuff like we've seen with some other guys who would be a concern. His number's 20 plus. You probably want to restructure and bring that down. I think George Fant could be in danger there if Abe's okay and they like what they got with Mike Jarrell. And they're like, oh, we have backup tackles and we can draft one, so we'll be fine. I think DK's number has to come down. Gino's number has to come down. Noah's number, I go back and forth on because it's not crazy. I think it's like 13 million or something like that. That you save or that his number is. I don't have it in front of me, but he's one that's kind of interesting.
You would save 8.9.
Yeah, you save 8. I think the number's 13. So yeah, that's a tricky one. I think the ones I'd feel most confident about, probably like, hey, there's no way you're back on that number, is Roy Robertson Harris, Rayshon Jenkins, Tyler, Draymond. Those are the ones I feel most confident about. Maybe Noah as well. And depending on George Fant's injury situation, I would throw him in there as well. Because they don't have a lot of money, Puck. They're in the red pretty deep, and they have a lot of moves I think they need to make. And it isn't just as simple as restructuring some guys. Like, they're going to have to make some hard decisions. But I think really simple, Tyler, Draymond, George, that might save you 30 mil. Right there, throwing Rayshon and Roy, I think we might be over at like 40 mil in savings just on like 5 guys.
There he is. Go check out all his work at The Athletic. Michael-Shawn Dugar joins us every single week talking Seahawks football. Also, go give a listen to the Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast with our guy Christopher Kidd. At the Vision for the Future is the latest podcast where you, for those two, Seahawks Man-to-Man, where you can find everywhere and anywhere on all your podcast platforms. All right, we'll be staying tuned all day long to see if they make that announcement for Klint Kubiak, perhaps being the new offensive coordinator for the Seahawks. Mike, appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
I appreciate it, man. Go Cougs.
Yeah, go Cougs. There he is. Michael-Shawn Dugar every single week with us. And again, that will be a podcast later up on YouTube when you're there. Again, like and subscribe. Please like me. Please. Subscribe to the channel. We'll put up Mike's episode up there every single week. For the audio, folks, everything will be up on Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. And, of course, pucksports.com.